nice thing about using men's shirts to upcycle is that the cotton generally is a really, really nice quality. I use them quite often when I upcycle clothes. So the first thing I'm going to do is mark my cold shoulder, the top of this cold shoulder and then the bottom, bearing in mind I don't want any underwear straps showing, so making sure that there's enough distance between the neck and the top of the hole. So I've measured out mine, it's about 17 centimetres. So I'm just marking my 17 centimetres along here, and I'm using this synthetic fabric as my pattern paper. It's really good because it's kind of like paper, and you can sew it, and you can fold it and crease it, and the creases stay where they are. So really good for when you're pattern cutting. So I've got my 17 centimetres here, and I'm then going to halve that. So half of that would be 8.5 centimetres. Okay, so that'll be the widest part of my oval. I'm then going to fold that in half, like so, and I've got my French curves here. I'm going to use that to help me shape my oval. So I'm going to just draw around here, the top left part, like that. Okay, and I'm going to fold again my pattern paper, and then hopefully when I've cut this out we should all be pretty symmetrical. So I'm going to fold it and then cut it. Okay. So there we have my template for my cold shoulder. So next you pin your pattern piece to the shoulder of your shirt, and then you're going to cut around that. So making sure that the top of your pattern piece is in the same place on both left and right shoulder. So as you can see, I've now cut one hole. At the same time, I have cut off the bottom of my sleeve. And I've cut it off just where that little placket finishes, because I quite like my sleeves a little bit 3/4 length. The next thing I'm going to do is make my ribbing, which I'm going to cut myself. I've got a nice piece of ribbing fabric here in white. I'm going to make sure that I have a nice straight edge along the top, so I can measure out my pieces so they're all the same size, the same width. Okay, so I'm drawing my straight line here, and then I find that using a ruler is a great guide to draw out the widths of your ribbing. So you can make your ribbing as wide or as thin as you like. I like mine fairly thin, so I'm going to mark out just the width of the ruler, and I'll cut out a few of these. I'm going to use the ribbing on the cuffs and on the cold shoulders. So work out roughly how many you think you're going to need, and then we're going to cut them out. So here my strips are all cut out, and not to worry about that blue line from the pen because that's going to actually wash out. The next thing to do is to pin my ribbing to my shoulder holes and to the cuff. So I've folded my ribbing in half. So I fold my ribbing in half, and now I'll attach it to my shirt. So this is where the two ends meet. So I'm just going to cut this, and where I've put my pin I'm going to make my seam so it'll make one continuous loop around the cold shoulder. So the next thing to do is to stitch this little seam up here. I'm actually using my overlocker here, but you could actually use a domestic sewing machine. Most sewing machines do actually have an overlocking stitch, so let's just do this seam. Good. And then as you can see now, I've got my seam in my ribbing to match the seam in the shirt. So all nice and neat. I'm going to pin that. And then I'm going to sew all the way around the edge. So there we go, there we have one shoulder done. The nice thing about the overlocker is that it makes it really neat and it's very, very quick. So I'm now going to do the same for each cuff and the other cold shoulder. One thing to remember too is that when you're doing your cuffs, you may want the cuffs to be a little bit smaller than the width of the shirt. So you can measure around the wrist, or if you're doing 3/4, it's probably going to land about there. So measure how tight you actually want the opening of your sleeve, and then you're going to make a little circle with that, sew those two sides together, and then pin that around the opening of your sleeve. So to cut the bottom off my shirt, I've just laid it out flat, and because I've got checks on my shirt, I've got a good guideline for where I can cut. So here she is, the final shirt, with a little blouson detail at the bottom and my little contrast button at the top. So really easy project for you to do. Should take you roughly maybe a couple of hours, hour and a half to get that done, and you've got a nice new top to wear for the weekend.